You're pathetic, Marcus. A real Mad would have gotten that promotion by now. Those words still echo in my mind as I sit here in my new downtown apartment watching the rain streak down the windows. 3 months ago, I was a devoted husband of 12 years, working 60-hour weeks to support what I thought was our shared dream. Today, I'm a man who discovered that the person sleeping next to me every night had been planning my destruction with surgical precision. When Victoria finally saw those divorce papers, her screams could be heard 3 blocks away. But by then, it was already too late. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. The morning it all began, I was scrambling eggs in our granite kitchen, the same kitchen Victoria had insisted we renovate last year using my entire bonus. She swept in wearing her silk robe, the one I'd bought her for our anniversary, her blonde hair perfectly styled even at 7 in the morning. Victoria had always been meticulous about her appearance, but lately it felt more like armor than vanity. "Marcus, we need to talk about your career situation," she announced, settling into the breakfast nook without offering to help. Her tone carried that familiar edge that had been growing sharper over the past year. "My book club met yesterday, and honestly, I'm embarrassed to tell them what you do." I paused, spatula in hand, processing her words. What I did was work as a senior systems analyst for Morrison Tech, a solid middle management position that paid well enough to afford our suburban lifestyle in Riverside Heights. I'd been with the company for 8 years, steadily climbing the ladder, respected by my colleagues, trusted by my superiors. Embarrassed? I set down the spatula and turned to face her. "Victoria, I make $85,000 a year. We live in a 4-bedroom house in one of the best neighborhoods in the city." She rolled her eyes, that practiced gesture that had become her default response to anything I said. "Cassandra's husband just made partner at his law firm. Jennifer's husband bought her a BMW for her birthday. And what do I get? A husband who's been stuck in the same dead-end job for nearly a decade." Dead-end job. The phrase stung because it revealed how she truly saw my work, my contributions, my efforts to provide for us. Morrison Tech wasn't glamorous, but it was stable, growing, and I genuinely enjoyed the problem-solving aspects of systems analysis. More importantly, my salary covered our mortgage, her shopping habits, and the lifestyle she demanded. "I've been working toward the director position," I said, plating her eggs exactly how she liked them, over easy with the whites fully set. "Victoria," she laughed, but there was no humor in it. "Might open up? Marcus, you've been saying that for 3 years. Meanwhile, other men are out there making things happen, building empires, becoming somebody important." I handed her the plate, noting how she accepted it without acknowledgement, as if my service was simply expected. When had gratitude disappeared from our marriage? When had I become invisible in my own home? "What exactly are you suggesting?" I asked, settling across from her with my own breakfast. "I'm suggesting you start acting like a man instead of a mouse." She cut into her eggs with precision, not looking at me. "Take risks. Demand what you deserve. Stop being so passive about everything." Passive, another word that had been appearing in her vocabulary lately, usually accompanied by that disappointed expression she'd perfected. I watched her eat, noting the expensive manicure, the diamond earrings I'd saved for months to buy, the designer watch she'd insisted was necessary for her image as my wife. "Victoria, I'm not passive. I'm careful. There's a difference between calculated risks and being reckless." She finally looked up, her green eyes cold in the morning light filtering through our bay window. "That's exactly what I'm talking about. Calculated risks, safe choices. You sound like an accountant, not a leader." The irony wasn't lost on me that she criticized my financial caution while wearing a $1,000 outfit purchased with money I'd earned through exactly that careful planning. But pointing out contradictions had never been welcome in our conversations. My phone buzzed with a text from my colleague Derek. "Budget meeting moved to 9. Johnson wants to discuss the Q4 projections." I showed Victoria the message, hoping she'd understand that my work involved real responsibilities, real deadlines, real impact on the company's success. "See?" she said, reading the text. You're excited about budget meetings. That's not normal, Marcus. Normal men don't get thrilled about spreadsheets and quarterly reports. I stared at her, wondering when enthusiasm for my profession had become a character flaw. It's called being engaged with my work. Some people might call that dedication. Some people might call it settling. She stood, leaving her half-finished breakfast on the table. I'm meeting Cassandra for yoga. Try to think about what I said today, about making some real changes. After she left, I sat alone in our kitchen, surrounded by the material evidence of my supposed failure. The granite countertops I'd researched for weeks before purchase. The stainless steel appliances I'd comparison shopped to get the best value. The custom cabinets I'd painted myself to save money for other priorities. Every detail represented careful planning, thoughtful decision-making, responsible stewardship of our resources. Yet somehow, in Victoria's estimation, these same qualities made me pathetic. I arrived at Morrison Tech 15 minutes early, as always, settling into my cubicle with coffee and the satisfaction of organized productivity. My workspace reflected my personality. Clean, efficient, everything in its proper place. Family photos lined one corner, including our wedding picture where Victoria smiled with what seemed like genuine happiness. Derek appeared at my cubicle entrance, coffee in hand, his usual Monday morning energy intact. Ready for Johnson's budget circus? Actually looking forward to it, I admitted, pulling up my analysis files. The Q4 numbers look strong. I think we're positioned for some interesting opportunities. Derek grinned. There's the systems geek I know and love.
Victoria still giving you grief about the promotion timeline? The question caught me off guard. Derek and I were friends, but I rarely discussed my marriage with colleagues. What makes you say that? Last company barbecue, she seemed intense about your career trajectory. Asked me point blank why you weren't in management yet. I processed this information, realizing Victoria had been conducting her own investigation into my professional standing. The thought that she'd been questioning my colleagues about my performance felt like a violation of boundaries I hadn't even known existed. "She's ambitious," I said carefully, "for both of us." Derek nodded, but his expression suggested he'd formed his own conclusions about my wife's attitude. Just remember, some of the best analysts I know took their time climbing the ladder. Quality over speed, right? The budget meeting exceeded my expectations. Johnson praised my quarterly analysis, specifically noting the cost-saving measures I'd identified in our software licensing structure. My recommendations could save the company nearly $50,000 annually, a contribution that would definitely factor into year-end performance reviews. "Excellent work, Marcus," Johnson said as the meeting concluded. "This is exactly the kind of strategic thinking we need in leadership positions." Leadership positions. The phrase echoed in my mind as I returned to my desk, energized by professional recognition. I immediately texted Victoria the good news, eager to share this validation of my career approach. Her response came 30 minutes later. "That's nice. Don't forget dinner with my parents tonight. Try to wear something that makes you look successful." Try to wear something that makes you look successful. As if my appearance was a carefully managed facade rather than authentic representation of who I was. I owned quality clothes, dressed professionally, maintained good grooming habits, but Victoria seemed to view my presentation as insufficient, requiring constant improvement to meet her standards. The afternoon passed quickly as I dove into preparation for a client presentation scheduled for Wednesday. The project involved streamlining data flow for one of our largest accounts, work that could potentially lead to expanded contracts and company growth. This was exactly the kind of high-visibility assignment that demonstrated leadership potential. Yet I found myself wondering if Victoria would see it that way, or if she'd focus on the fact that it wasn't an immediate promotion with a substantial salary increase. By 5:30, I was heading home, mentally preparing for dinner with Victoria's parents. Richard and Eleanor Pemberton were successful people who'd built a thriving real estate empire in the city. They were also people who measured worth primarily through financial achievement and social status. Victoria was already dressed when I arrived, wearing a black cocktail dress that probably cost more than most people's monthly rent. She looked stunning, as always, but her expression carried that familiar dissatisfaction. "Finally," she said, checking her watch. "We need to leave in 20 minutes. Please tell me you're not wearing that shirt." I looked down at my button-down Oxford, a quality shirt I'd worn to important meetings without anyone suggesting it was inappropriate. "What's wrong with this shirt?" "It's so ordinary. Don't you have something with more style? Something that shows you have taste and ambition?" I changed into a shirt Victoria approved of, noting how her validation felt more like relief than satisfaction. When had my wife's approval become something I had to earn through costume changes? The drive to the Pemberton house took 20 minutes through increasingly expensive neighborhoods. Victoria spent the time coaching me on conversation topics, warning me away from work stories that might make me sound too much like a middle manager. "Remember, Dad respects boldness," she said, adjusting her lipstick in the visor mirror. "Talk about your plans for advancement, not your satisfaction with current responsibilities." "What if I am satisfied with my current responsibilities?" She turned to stare at me, her expression incredulous. "Marcus, you can't be serious. Satisfaction is what people feel when they've given up on growth." Richard Pemberton answered the door wearing a suit that probably cost more than my monthly salary. He was a man who commanded respect through presence and achievement, someone who'd built something substantial from nothing. I admired his success, even if our approaches to life differed significantly. "Marcus," he gripped my hand firmly, come in, come in. Eleanor's just finishing in the kitchen." The Pemberton house represented everything Victoria aspired to. Custom everything, imported materials, artwork that required insurance policies. It was beautiful, impressive, and completely intimidating. Every room whispered about money, power, and social positioning. Eleanor emerged from the kitchen, elegant in that effortless way that comes from generations of privilege. She kissed Victoria's cheek, then offered me a polite smile that never quite reached her eyes. "How's work treating you, Marcus?" she asked as we settled in their living room with cocktails I couldn't pronounce. "Very well, actually. Just had a meeting today where my cost-saving analysis was well received. Could save the company $50,000 annually." Richard nodded approvingly. Cost control is crucial in any business, shows analytical thinking. But Victoria jumped in before I could continue. "He's being modest. Marcus is being considered for a director position, aren't you, honey?" The way she phrased it made it sound like a certainty rather than a possibility. I felt the familiar discomfort of having my achievements exaggerated for social consumption. "It's one possibility among several," I clarified. "The company promotes based on performance and opportunity alignment." Eleanor's smile tightened almost imperceptibly. "How prudent." Prudent. Another word that sounded complimentary but carried undertones of disappointment. I was beginning to recognize the coded language Victoria's family used to express their assessment of my adequacy as a husband. Dinner conversation revolved around the Pembertons' latest property acquisitions, vacation plans for their summer house in the Hamptons, and speculation about interest rate impacts on luxury real estate markets. I contributed where appropriate, but increasingly felt like an observer rather than a participant in discussions about lifestyles far beyond my current means. "Marcus," Richard said during dessert, "have you considered branching out on your own? Consulting can be quite lucrative for someone with your analytical background." The suggestion carried weight coming from a successful entrepreneur. "I've thought about it occasionally, but I value the stability and resources of working for an established company." Victoria's fork clattered against her plate. Stability. There's that word again. Her parents exchanged a glance I wasn't meant to see, but caught anyway. A look that confirmed their shared assessment of their daughter's choice in husbands. "Sometimes," Eleanor said carefully, "stability can become a comfortable cage." A comfortable cage? The metaphor struck me as both insightful and insulting. Was my approach to career and life really a form of self-imprisonment, or was it responsible planning for long-term success and security? The evening concluded with polite thanks and promises to get together again soon. During the drive home, Victoria stared out the passenger window, her silence heavy with unspoken criticism. "Your parents seem well," I offered, hoping to break the tension. "They're disappointed in you," she said without turning around. "Dad thinks you lack ambition. Mom thinks you lack drive. The direct assault caught me unprepared. They said that? They don't have to say it. It's obvious in how they talk to you, how they look at you. You're not what they expected when I married you. I pulled into our driveway, my hands trembling slightly on the steering wheel. 12 years of marriage had weathered many storms, but tonight felt different. Tonight felt like an evaluation I'd failed without knowing I was being tested. What did they expect? Victoria finally looked at me, her expression a mixture of frustration and something that might have been pity. Someone who would fight for what he wanted. Someone who would build something bigger than a middle management salary and a suburban mortgage. I thought they expected someone who would love their daughter and provide a stable life for her. Love isn't enough, Marcus. It's never been enough. We sat in the car for several minutes, the engine ticking as it cooled, both of us processing the weight of her admission. Love isn't enough. The foundation of everything I'd believed about our marriage had just shifted beneath my feet. Inside the house, Victoria went straight to her evening routine, while I sat in my home office, staring at the framed certificates and awards that represented my professional accomplishments. Employee of the Month recognitions, completion certificates from advanced training programs, commendation letters from satisfied clients, evidence of competence, dedication, and steady progress, but apparently not evidence of the kind of success that mattered to my wife or her family. I opened my laptop and began researching director-level positions at competing companies, curious about market rates and advancement opportunities. The search revealed opportunities I hadn't considered, positions that would represent significant salary increases and prestige improvements. It also revealed how comfortable I'd become in my current role, how my preference for stability might indeed be limiting my potential growth. Victoria appeared in the doorway, dressed for bed, watching me scroll through job listings. Finally doing some research, just exploring options. She moved behind my chair, placing her hands on my shoulders in the first affectionate gesture of the evening. That's all I want, Marcus, for you to explore your potential instead of settling for safe choices. Her touch felt good, familiar, like the connection that had drawn us together initially. But underneath the physical comfort lay questions I'd never thought to ask. When had safety become synonymous with failure in her mind? When had my approach to life become insufficient for her happiness? Victoria, are you happy? With us, with our marriage. She was quiet for a long moment, her hands still resting on my shoulders. I'm happy with the man you could become. I'm frustrated with the man you've chosen to be. The distinction felt crucial, devastating, and completely unexpected. For 12 years, I'd believed I was growing, improving, building something worthwhile with my wife. Instead, I'd apparently been disappointing her with every safe choice, every stable decision, every moment of satisfaction with my current circumstances. What if this is who I am? What if I value security and steady progress over risk and dramatic change? Her hands lifted from my shoulders. Then, I guess we'll have to figure out if that's enough for both of us. She left me alone with my laptop and my doubts, the sound of her footsteps on the stairs marking the end of a conversation that felt like the beginning of something I wasn't ready to name. I stayed up until nearly midnight, researching opportunities, reading about career transitions, trying to understand if my approach to professional growth was genuinely limiting or simply different from Victoria's expectations. The evidence suggested both perspectives held merit. I was good at my job, respected by colleagues, valued by my employer. I was also, as Victoria had pointed out, comfortably positioned rather than aggressively advancing. The question was whether my satisfaction with steady progress represented wisdom or complacency. By the time I finally went to bed, Victoria was already asleep or pretending to be. I lay beside her in the darkness, listening to her breathing, wondering when our marriage had become a performance evaluation I was failing. The next morning brought no resolution, only the continuation of routines that now felt charged with unspoken tension. Victoria's coffee preparation, my breakfast cooking, her casual dismissal of my conversational attempts. Everything the same, everything different. At work, Derek noticed my distraction immediately. Rough night with the in-laws. Something like that. I settled into my desk chair, grateful for the familiar environment where my contributions were valued and my approach was respected. Want to talk about it? I considered his offer, weighing the relief of confession against the privacy of marriage. Victoria thinks I'm not ambitious enough. Her parents agree. Derek whistled softly. That's harsh. You're one of the most dedicated people I know. Dedicated, yes. But apparently not ambitious in the way that matters to them. Which is what, exactly? Risk-taking, dramatic career moves, building something impressive rather than maintaining something solid. Derek leaned against my cubicle wall, his expression thoughtful. You know, I've watched a lot of people chase impressive over solid. Most of them crashed and burned. There's something to be said for sustainable success. His validation helped, but it didn't resolve the fundamental tension brewing at home. Victoria wanted a different kind of husband, one who pursued wealth and status with the same intensity she applied to social positioning and material acquisition. The question was whether I could become that person without losing the core qualities that defined who I was. Johnson stopped by my desk around 10 with news that would complicate everything. Marcus, I wanted to give you a heads up. The director position is opening up sooner than expected. Peterson's taking early retirement at the end of next month. My pulse quickened. Next month? I know it's fast, but your recent work has been outstanding. I'd like to put your name forward for consideration. The position comes with a $20,000 salary increase and significant management responsibilities. $20,000! Enough to satisfy Victoria's immediate concerns about my earning potential. Management responsibilities that would address her criticism of my career stagnation. Everything she'd been demanding offered on a timeline that could resolve our current tension. I'm definitely interested, I said, probably too quickly. What's the process? Formal interview next week, presentation to the executive team the following Monday. It's competitive, but you're my top recommendation. After Johnson left, I sat staring at my computer screen, processing the sudden acceleration of possibilities Victoria had been pushing me toward. The promotion represented everything she claimed to want from my career, validation of her belief that I needed to pursue advancement more aggressively. I called her immediately with the news, eager to share this development that could change everything between us. Marcus? Her voice carried surprise at the mid-morning call. Victoria, I have incredible news. The director position just opened up. Johnson wants to recommend me for it. 20,000 more, management responsibilities, everything you've been talking about. Silence stretched across the connection for several seconds. When? Interview next week, decision by month's end. It's happening exactly like you said it should. That's wonderful. But her tone lacked the enthusiasm I'd expected. What changed? The question puzzled me. Peterson's retiring early. The timeline accelerated. No, I mean, what changed with you? Yesterday you were content with your current position. Today you're excited about advancement opportunities. I processed her response, recognizing that my enthusiasm for the promotion might appear reactive rather than authentic. I've been thinking about what you said, about exploring my potential instead of settling for safety. So this is about making me happy, not about what you actually want. The conversation had taken an unexpected turn. Victoria had been pressuring me for months to pursue advancement, but now that advancement was within reach, she seemed suspicious of my motivation. Can't it be both? Can't I want career growth and want to make you happy? Marcus, I need to know that you're making these choices because you believe in them, not because you're trying to fix our marriage with a promotion. Fix our marriage. The phrase suggested damage I hadn't fully acknowledged. Was our relationship really in need of repair? Or was this simply the natural tension that came with different approaches to ambition and success? Are we broken, Victoria? Is our marriage in trouble? Another long pause. I think we're at a crossroads. You can keep being the safe, careful person you've always been, or you can start becoming someone who takes control of his life. But I can't keep pretending I'm satisfied with a husband who settles for comfortable mediocrity. Comfortable mediocrity. The phrase hit like a physical blow, reducing 12 years of responsible choices to a character flaw. I sat in my cubicle, surrounded by colleagues who respected my work, holding a phone connected to a wife who viewed my professional approach as fundamentally inadequate. "I'll get this promotion," I said, surprising myself with the determination in my voice. "And then we'll see if that changes how you feel about our marriage." "Marcus, that's not." I ended the call before she could finish, my hands shaking with a combination of anger and hurt I'd never experienced in our relationship. Victoria had spent months criticizing my career approach, but when advancement actually materialized, she questioned my authenticity in pursuing it. For the first time since our marriage began, I wondered if the problem wasn't my lack of ambition, but her inability to recognize the value of the man she'd married. The rest of the day passed in a blur of preparation and determination. I researched the director role, studied comparable positions at other companies, prepared talking points for an interview that could change everything. But underneath the professional focus ran a current of doubt about whether this promotion would actually resolve anything between Victoria and me. By the time I reached home that evening, I'd convinced myself that success in the interview would prove something important about my capabilities and commitment to growth. Victoria would see that her husband could rise to challenges when opportunities presented themselves. Instead, I found her sitting at our kitchen table, surrounded by papers and wearing an expression I'd never seen before. "We need to talk," she said without looking up. I set down my briefcase, noting the formal documents spread across the table. Financial statements, property valuations, legal letterhead. The kind of paperwork that suggested serious business rather than casual conversation. "What's all this?" Victoria finally met my eyes, and what I saw there changed everything I thought I knew about our marriage. "I've been planning this, Marcus. The promotion, the career pressure, all of it was just me trying to convince myself you could change into someone I could respect." My legs felt unsteady as the full weight of her words sank in.
Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Planning what? She gestured to the papers with a hand that trembled slightly. "Our divorce." The papers scattered across our kitchen table told a story I'd been too blind to see. Victoria had consulted attorneys, obtained property valuations, and calculated asset divisions while I'd been focused on proving my worth through career advancement. Every criticism about my ambition, every suggestion that I needed to change had been theater designed to justify what she'd already decided. I picked up the top document, a consultation summary from Hartwell & Associates, one of the city's most expensive divorce firms. The date was 3 months old, meaning Victoria had been planning our separation since before her intensified campaign for my career transformation. 3 months, I said, my voice sounding strange in the sudden quiet of our kitchen. "You've been planning this for 3 months." Victoria's composure cracked slightly, revealing something that might have been guilt or relief. "I needed to be sure, Marcus. I needed to give us every possible chance before making this decision." "By lying to me? By pretending my career was the problem when you'd already given up on our marriage?" She stood abruptly, moving to the window that overlooked our backyard. The garden we'd planted together 3 years ago was visible in the fading light, roses and lavender creating the peaceful sanctuary we'd both enjoyed during happier times. "I wasn't lying about your career being a problem. That's real, Marcus, but it's not the only problem, and fixing it wouldn't have saved us." I continued reading through the legal documents, each page revealing another aspect of Victoria's methodical preparation. Bank account analyses, retirement fund valuations, mortgage assessments. She'd been conducting a complete financial audit of our life together, calculating her exit strategy with the same precision she applied to interior decorating. "What are the other problems?" I asked, genuinely curious about her comprehensive list of my inadequacies. Victoria turned from the window, her expression shifting into something resembling the woman I'd fallen in love with 12 years ago. For a moment, vulnerability replaced calculation, revealing the pain beneath her careful planning. "You stopped dreaming, Marcus. Somewhere along the way, you decided that comfortable was enough, that safe was sufficient, that maintaining what we had was better than building something extraordinary." And what did you want me to build? I wanted you to want something more than what you had. I wanted to see hunger in your eyes, ambition that kept you awake at night, plans that excited you so much you couldn't wait to share them with me. I set down the legal papers and really looked at my wife, perhaps for the first time in years. Victoria was beautiful, intelligent, capable of inspiring others when she believed in a cause. She was also someone who measured worth through external validation and comparative success. I was hungry, Victoria, for knowledge, for competence, for the satisfaction of solving complex problems and helping organizations function better. But that wasn't the kind of hunger you wanted to see. No, she admitted, it wasn't. The honesty felt like both relief and devastation. We'd been fundamentally incompatible in ways neither of us had acknowledged, pursuing different definitions of success and fulfillment. My satisfaction with incremental progress had felt like stagnation to her. Her need for dramatic advancement had felt like instability to me. So what happens now? I asked, gesturing to the divorce paperwork that represented the legal dissolution of everything we'd built together. Victoria returned to the table, settling into her chair with the exhausted posture of someone who'd been carrying a heavy burden for too long. Now we try to end this with whatever dignity we can salvage. Dignity, I laughed, but there was no humor in the sound. Is there dignity in planning someone's disposal while pretending to help them improve? That's not fair, Marcus. I really hoped you'd change. The promotion pressure, the career discussions, all of that came from genuine belief that you could become someone I could build a future with. But you were hedging your bets, consulting divorce attorneys while encouraging my professional development. Victoria's silence confirmed what I'd already understood. She'd been playing both sides, hoping for transformation while preparing for termination. The promotion opportunity that had excited me that morning now felt like a cruel joke, a test I was destined to fail because the examiner had already written my failing grade. I walked to our refrigerator and opened a beer, needing something to steady my hands while processing the complete reconstruction of my reality. The kitchen around us contained years of shared meals, conversations, arguments, and reconciliations. All of it had been building toward this moment when Victoria revealed she'd been documenting our relationship's failure instead of fighting for its success. "There's something else you need to know," Victoria said, her voice barely above a whisper. My stomach clenched with anticipation of additional betrayal. "What else?" "I've been seeing someone." The beer bottle slipped from my fingers, shattering against our tile floor in an explosion of glass and foam. Victoria didn't move to help clean it up, just sat watching my reaction with clinical detachment. "Seeing someone," I repeated, my mind struggling to process this new information alongside the divorce paperwork and months of deception. "His name is David Brennan. He's a commercial real estate developer. We met at Cassandra's husband's law firm holiday party 6 months ago." 6 months? Half a year of adultery while she criticized my career choices and pushed me toward changes that would never have been sufficient to save our marriage? The mathematical precision was almost admirable in its cruelty. "How long have you been sleeping with him?" Victoria flinched at the directness of the question. "Marcus, it's not like that. We connected intellectually first. The physical relationship developed gradually." "How long, Victoria?" 3 months. The same timeline as her divorce consultations. She'd been building a new relationship while systematically dismantling our marriage, ensuring she had somewhere to land before jumping from our life together. I grabbed paper towels and began cleaning up the broken glass, grateful for the simple task that required focus while my mind processed the complete scope of Victoria's betrayal. Adultery, deception, financial planning for my abandonment, and months of psychological manipulation disguised as marriage counseling. "Does he know about me?" I asked, disposing of glass fragments with careful precision. "He knows I'm married. He knows I'm planning to file for divorce. So he's aware he's participating in adultery." Victoria's composure finally cracked completely. It's not adultery when the marriage has been dead for years, Marcus. What David and I have is real connection, shared ambition, complementary goals for the future. What we had was real too, Victoria.
At least I thought it was. She began gathering the legal documents, organizing them into neat stacks with the efficiency that characterized everything she did. What we had was comfortable routine masquerading as partnership. You were content to maintain the status quo forever. I needed more. You needed a man who would finance the lifestyle you wanted while providing the social status you craved. That's not true, isn't it? Look at these papers, Victoria. You've calculated everything down to the last dollar. This isn't about love or connection or shared dreams. This is about upgrading to a husband with better earning potential and social positioning. Victoria's face flushed with anger, the first genuine emotion she'd displayed since revealing her plans. David makes me feel alive in ways you never did. He challenges me, inspires me, makes me want to be better than I am. And what do I make you feel? Safe, comfortable, predictable, like I could spend the next 30 years exactly where I am right now, never growing, never changing, never becoming anything more than a middle management wife in suburban mediocrity. The phrase cut deep because it contained truth alongside the cruelty. I had been comfortable with our life, satisfied with steady progress, content with the security we'd built together. Those qualities had attracted Victoria initially, but somewhere along the way, they'd become sources of resentment rather than appreciation. So David Brennan represents everything I'm not. David represents possibility, adventure, the kind of future that excites me instead of simply sustaining me. I finished cleaning the floor and stood facing my wife across the kitchen that had been the heart of our home. She looked beautiful and determined, like a woman who'd made peace with difficult decisions. She also looked like a stranger, someone I'd been living with without really knowing. "What's your timeline for this divorce?" Victoria consulted her organized documents. "I'd like to file papers next week. The attorney says we can expedite everything if we agree on asset division and avoid contested proceedings." "You want me to make this easy for you?" "I want us both to move forward with minimal damage." I walked to the kitchen window where Victoria had stood earlier, looking out at our garden in the growing darkness. The roses we'd planted were blooming magnificently, the result of 3 years of careful tending and patient cultivation. Tomorrow, they'd be Victoria's to enjoy or abandon as she chose. "What about the house?" "David and I want to buy it from you. We're prepared to offer fair market value." The audacity took my breath away. "You want me to sell our home to you and your lover?" "It makes financial sense, Marcus. You'll get your equity out immediately, and I'll be able to stay in the neighborhood I love." I turned from the window to study Victoria's face, searching for any trace of the woman who'd once cried with happiness when we'd bought this house together. She'd been so excited about our first real home, making plans for children's rooms and holiday gatherings, dreaming about the life we'd build within these walls. "Did you ever love me, Victoria? Or was I always just a stepping stone to something better?" The question hung between us for a long moment while she considered her answer. When she finally spoke, her voice carried a sadness that seemed genuine. "I loved the man I thought you could become. I loved the potential I saw in you when we first met. But you chose to be satisfied with less than your capabilities, and I couldn't pretend that was enough for me anymore. So you found someone who matched your ambitions and decided to trade up. I found someone who shares my vision for what life could be instead of settling for what it is." I nodded slowly, finally understanding the fundamental incompatibility that had been growing between us for years. Victoria needed constant forward momentum, escalating achievements, and continuous improvement. I needed stability, consistency, and the peace that came with sustainable success. Neither approach was wrong, but they were utterly incompatible within a marriage that required shared goals and mutual respect. "I'll need time to review all this," I said, gesturing to the legal documents, "and I'll want my own attorney." Of course, I've prepared a list of qualified divorce attorneys who aren't in conflict with my representation. Even in divorce, Victoria was managing the process. She'd thought of everything, planned for every contingency, eliminated surprises that might delay her transition to her new life with David Brennan. Is there anything else you need to tell me? Any other betrayals I should know about before I start planning my own response? Victoria hesitated, and I saw something flicker across her face that might have been guilt or fear. Marcus, I need you to understand that none of this was intended to hurt you. I tried to make our marriage work. I really did. By having an affair and planning my disposal without my knowledge. By trying to inspire you to become the man I needed you to be. The conversation had reached its natural conclusion. Victoria believed she'd been justified in her deception because I'd failed to transform into her ideal husband. I believed she'd been manipulative and dishonest because she'd refused to accept the man she'd actually married. I'm going to stay at Derek's tonight, I said, pulling my phone out to text my colleague. I need time to process all this before we discuss details. Victoria nodded, probably relieved to have the immediate confrontation resolved. Marcus, I know this is painful, but eventually you'll see that this is better for both of us. We'll both be free to find partners who appreciate who we actually are. I paused at the kitchen doorway, looking back at the woman who'd shared my life for 12 years and was now eager to replace me with someone who better matched her aspirations. Victoria, you're probably right about that. But when you're enjoying your exciting new life with David Brennan, remember that you threw away a man who would have loved you faithfully for the rest of his life. Not everyone gets that kind of devotion, and not everyone who loses it finds it again. I left her sitting at the kitchen table with her divorce papers and her plans for a more ambitious future, walking out of the house that would soon belong to her and her lover. Derek answered his phone on the second ring. Marcus, what's up? I need a place to stay tonight. Victoria wants a divorce, and there's more to the story than I can explain over the phone. Jesus, of course, man. Come over whenever you're ready. I packed a suitcase with clothes and essential items, moving through my bedroom like a stranger collecting evidence of a life that had already ended. Victoria remained in the kitchen, probably calling David Brennan to report her successful revelation of their plans. The drive to Derek's apartment gave me time to begin processing the complete reconstruction of my reality. This morning, I'd been a married man worried about career advancement. Tonight, I was a man whose wife had been conducting a systematic campaign of deception while preparing to replace me with someone who better matched her social and financial ambitions. Derek's building sat in downtown Phoenix, a modern complex popular with young professionals who valued location over space. His one-bedroom apartment was clean, minimal, and perfectly suited to a man who spent most of his time either working or pursuing outdoor activities. "You look like hell," Derek said, opening a beer and settling across from me in his living room. "I feel worse than I look." I accepted the beer gratefully, noting how different it tasted from the one I'd dropped in my kitchen an hour earlier. Victoria's been planning our divorce for months while convincing me that career advancement would save our marriage. Derek whistled softly. That's brutal, even for her. "You never liked Victoria." "I never trusted Victoria. There's a difference. She always seemed to be evaluating you instead of enjoying you." The observation was painfully accurate. Victoria had been conducting a continuous assessment of my adequacy as a husband, measuring my performance against standards I'd never been told about. Every conversation about my career had been a test I was destined to fail because the examiner had already decided I was inadequate. She's been having an affair with a real estate developer named David Brennan, wants to buy our house so she can live there with him. Derek's expression darkened. "She wants you to sell your house to her and her boyfriend?" Apparently, it makes financial sense. It makes sense if you're a sociopath with no understanding of human emotions. I spent the next hour explaining the complete scope of Victoria's deception, from the months of marriage counseling disguised as career pressure to the divorce attorney consultations that had been running parallel to her affair. Derek listened with the focused attention he brought to complex technical problems, occasionally asking clarifying questions, but mostly allowing me to process the betrayal through narration. "So what's your plan?" he asked when I'd finished the story.
I don't have a plan yet. I'm still trying to understand what actually happened. What happened is that your wife is a calculating opportunist who's been playing a long game while you've been playing fair. The question is whether you're going to keep playing fair or start protecting yourself. Derek's assessment was harsh, but probably accurate. Victoria had been conducting strategic warfare while I'd been attempting honest communication. She'd been planning my replacement while I'd been working to improve our relationship. What would protecting myself look like? Getting your own attorney, documenting everything she's done, making sure she doesn't walk away with assets she's not entitled to while she's shacking up with her new boyfriend in the house you helped pay for. The suggestion made sense from a practical standpoint, but it also represented a fundamental shift in how I approached conflict. I'd always preferred collaboration over confrontation, compromise over competition. But collaboration required good faith from both parties, and Victoria had demonstrated she was operating from a completely different playbook. She's prepared for a quick, uncontested divorce, wants to file papers next week. Of course she does. The faster she can finalize everything, the sooner she can start her new life without worrying about complications from her old one. I considered Derek's perspective while finishing my beer. Victoria's urgency about the divorce timeline wasn't just about ending our marriage. It was about beginning her future with David Brennan without the messy complications that might arise if I had time to fully understand my legal position. Derek, can I ask you something personal? Shoot. Do you think I'm really as passive and unambitious as Victoria claims? Is she right about me settling for comfortable mediocrity? Derek was quiet for several minutes, clearly considering his response carefully. Marcus, you're one of the most competent people I know. You approach problems systematically, you follow through on commitments, and you build things that last. But you're also conflict-averse to a fault, and you tend to assume other people share your values about fairness and honesty. Which means you're probably better at your job than you are at protecting yourself from people who see kindness as weakness. The assessment stung because it contained uncomfortable truth. I had been assuming Victoria shared my commitment to our marriage, even as she demonstrated increasing dissatisfaction. I had been interpreting her career pressure as supportive encouragement rather than recognizing it as evidence of fundamental incompatibility. So what would someone who's better at protecting himself do in this situation? Derek grinned for the first time all evening. He'd stop playing defense and start playing offense. He'd stop reacting to his wife's plans and start making some plans of his own. I spent the night on Derek's couch, staring at the ceiling and thinking about offensive strategies versus defensive responses. Victoria had been playing offense for months, positioning herself for maximum advantage while keeping me focused on career improvement that would never have been sufficient to save our marriage. Tomorrow, I would begin developing my own strategic approach to the divorce she'd initiated. But tonight, I allowed myself to grieve the loss of the woman I'd thought I'd married and the life I'd believed we were building together. The next morning brought clarity along with coffee and Derek's practical wisdom about protecting assets during divorce proceedings. I called in sick to work, something I'd done perhaps 5 times in 8 years, and dedicated the day to understanding my legal and financial position. My first stop was the office of Patricia Wells, a divorce attorney Derek had recommended based on her reputation for aggressive advocacy and thorough preparation. Her office occupied the top floor of a downtown high-rise, with floor-to-ceiling windows that offered commanding views of the city. Patricia Wells appeared to be in her 50s, with silver hair and sharp eyes that suggested she'd seen every variety of marital deception. She listened to my story without interruption, taking notes on a legal pad and occasionally asking pointed questions about timelines and documentation. "Mr. Hendricks," she said when I'd finished, "your wife has been preparing for this divorce with military precision. The question is whether you're prepared to fight back with equal determination. What would fighting back involve? First, we document everything: the affair, the deception, the months of psychological manipulation disguised as marriage counseling. Arizona is a no-fault divorce state, but adultery and fraud can still impact asset division and spousal support calculations." Patricia spread a series of forms across her conference table, each one designed to capture different aspects of my financial situation. Second, we conduct our own asset evaluation. I suspect your wife's numbers are conservative regarding your home's value and optimistic regarding her contributions to your marital assets.
She wants to buy the house with her boyfriend? Patricia's laugh was sharp and humorless. Of course she does. Nothing says amicable divorce like forcing your ex-husband to sell his home to your lover. Can she do that? Not without your agreement. And my job is to make sure any agreement you reach serves your interests as well as hers. You never liked Victoria. I never trusted Victoria. There's a difference. She always seemed to be evaluating you instead of enjoying you. The observation was painfully accurate. Victoria had been conducting a continuous assessment of my adequacy as a husband, measuring my performance against standards I'd never been told about. Every conversation about my career had been a test I was destined to fail because the examiner had already decided I was inadequate. She's been having an affair with a real estate developer named David Brennan, wants to buy our house so she can live there with him. Derek's expression darkened. She wants you to sell your house to her and her boyfriend? Apparently, it makes financial sense. It makes sense if you're a sociopath with no understanding of human emotions. I spent the next hour explaining the complete scope of Victoria's deception, from the months of marriage counseling disguised as career pressure to the divorce attorney consultations that had been running parallel to her affair. Derek listened with the focused attention he brought to complex technical problems, occasionally asking clarifying questions, but mostly allowing me to process the betrayal through narration. "So what's your plan?" he asked when I'd finished the story. "I don't have a plan yet. I'm still trying to understand what actually happened. What happened is that your wife is a calculating opportunist who's been playing a long game while you've been playing fair. The question is whether you're going to keep playing fair or start protecting yourself." Derek's assessment was harsh, but probably accurate. Victoria had been conducting strategic warfare while I'd been attempting honest communication. She'd been planning my replacement while I'd been working to improve our relationship. What would protecting myself look like? Getting your own attorney, documenting everything she's done, making sure she doesn't walk away with assets she's not entitled to while she's shacking up with her new boyfriend in the house you helped pay for. The suggestion made sense from a practical standpoint, but it also represented a fundamental shift in how I approached conflict. I'd always preferred collaboration over confrontation, compromise over competition. But collaboration required good faith from both parties, and Victoria had demonstrated she was operating from a completely different playbook. She's prepared for a quick, uncontested divorce, wants to file papers next week. Of course she does. The faster she can finalize everything, the sooner she can start her new life without worrying about complications from her old one. I considered Derek's perspective while finishing my beer. Victoria's urgency about the divorce timeline wasn't just about ending our marriage. It was about beginning her future with David Brennan without the messy complications that might arise if I had time to fully understand my legal position. "Derek, can I ask you something personal?" "Shoot. Do you think I'm really as passive and unambitious as Victoria claims? Is she right about me settling for comfortable mediocrity?" Derek was quiet for several minutes, clearly
We spent 2 hours reviewing my financial situation, identifying assets Victoria might have undervalued and expenses she might have overlooked. Patricia's questions revealed the depth of preparation required for effective divorce negotiation, a level of strategic thinking I'd never applied to personal relationships. "Ms. Wells, can I ask you something?" "Of course." "Is it possible that Victoria is right about me? That I really am too passive and unambitious for a successful marriage?" Patricia set down her pen and studied my face with professional assessment. "Mr. Hendricks, I've represented hundreds of people going through divorce. Some are victims of genuine incompatibility. Others are victims of partners who view marriage as a stepping stone to something better. Which category do you think applies to me?" "Based on your wife's behavior, I'd say you're dealing with someone who sees relationships as transactions rather than partnerships. The question is whether you're going to let her define the terms of this transaction or insist on terms that protect your legitimate interests." I left Patricia's office with homework assignments that would have impressed my most demanding professors. Financial documentation to gather, asset valuations to obtain, timeline reconstruction to complete. The process would take weeks and cost thousands of dollars, but it would also ensure that Victoria's carefully planned divorce encountered resistance she hadn't anticipated.
My second stop was Morrison Tech, where I needed to have a difficult conversation with Johnson about the promotion opportunity that had excited me 24 hours earlier. The director position represented everything Victoria had claimed to want from my career, but it no longer mattered for our relationship's survival. Johnson was reviewing quarterly reports when I knocked on his office door. "Marcus, perfect timing. I've been thinking about your interview strategy for next week." Actually, that's what I wanted to discuss. My personal situation has become complicated, and I'm not sure this is the right time for a major career transition. Johnson's expression shifted from enthusiasm to concern. "Everything okay at home?" I considered how much to reveal, weighing professional discretion against the need for honest communication with someone whose support I valued. "Victoria and I are getting divorced. She filed papers yesterday, and the process is going to require significant time and attention over the next few months." "I'm sorry to hear that, Marcus. Divorce is never easy, regardless of the circumstances." "I don't want to withdraw from consideration for the director position, but I also don't want to commit to new responsibilities while dealing with major personal upheaval." Johnson nodded thoughtfully. "What if we postponed your interview for 30 days? The position needs to be filled, but I have confidence that you'll still be our strongest candidate once you've had time to stabilize your situation." The offer represented exactly the kind of flexibility and understanding that characterized good management. Johnson valued my contributions enough to adjust his timeline, demonstrating the professional respect Victoria had convinced me I lacked. "That would be incredibly helpful. Thank you for understanding." "Marcus, I hope you know that your value to this company isn't dependent on your marital status or personal circumstances. You're a solid employee and a good man. Don't let anyone convince you otherwise." The validation meant more than Johnson probably realized. After months of Victoria's criticism about my career trajectory, hearing genuine appreciation from my supervisor felt like rediscovering professional worth I'd forgotten I possessed. I spent the rest of the day at Morrison Tech, throwing myself into projects that required analytical thinking and systematic problem-solving. The familiar challenges felt therapeutic after 24 hours of emotional chaos, reminding me that I was competent and valuable in contexts where my contributions were appreciated. Derek found me still working at 7:30, long after most of our colleagues had gone home. "How'd it go with the attorney?" "Patricia Wells is impressive, also expensive, but she thinks Victoria has been underestimating both my assets and my willingness to fight for them." "Good. What's your timeline?" "Weeks, not days. Victoria wants quick resolution, but Patricia says I should take time to fully understand my position before agreeing to anything." Derek perched on the edge of my desk, studying my face with the concern of a genuine friend. "How are you holding up emotionally?" The question caught me off guard. I'd been so focused on legal and financial strategies that I hadn't fully processed the emotional impact of discovering my wife's systematic betrayal. "I'm angry," I admitted, "not just about the divorce, but about the months of deception. She convinced me the problem was my lack of ambition, when the real problem was her lack of commitment to our marriage. Anger can be useful if you channel it constructively." "What do you mean?" "I mean, you've spent 12 years being the accommodating husband who tried to make Victoria happy. Maybe it's time to focus on making Marcus happy instead." The suggestion represented a fundamental shift in perspective. For years, my primary relationship goal had been Victoria's satisfaction with our marriage. I'd measured my success as a husband through her contentment, her social comfort, her material desires. But Victoria had been measuring our relationship through completely different criteria, and my efforts to please her had been irrelevant to her ultimate goals. "Derek, what would focusing on my own happiness look like?" "For starters, it would look like not selling your house to your wife and her boyfriend just because she says it makes financial sense." I laughed for the first time in 24 hours. Patricia said the same thing. "Smart woman. What else did she recommend?" "Complete financial analysis, documentation of Victoria's affair, strategic approach to asset division, and refusal to accept her timeline for quick resolution." "Sounds like you're finally playing offense instead of defense." We worked together for another hour, Derek helping me organize the financial documentation Patricia had requested. The process felt like conducting a forensic audit of my own life, examining 12 years of marriage through the lens of legal strategy rather than emotional attachment. By the time we locked up the office, I had a clear understanding of the work ahead. Victoria had spent months preparing for this divorce while maintaining the fiction of marriage counseling. Now I would spend however long it took to ensure that her strategic advantage didn't come at the expense of my legitimate interests. The drive back to Derek's apartment took me past the neighborhood where Victoria and I had built our life together. I could have turned down Maple Street to see our house, to begin the emotional process of saying goodbye to the place where I'd expected to spend the rest of my life. Instead, I drove straight to Derek's building, focusing on the future I would build rather than the past Victoria had systematically dismantled while pretending to work toward our shared goals. My phone buzzed with a text from Victoria as I parked in Derek's garage. "Marcus, we need to discuss timeline and logistics. Can you come by the house tomorrow evening?" I stared at the message for several minutes, recognizing Victoria's attempt to maintain control over our interaction schedule. 3 days ago, I would have agreed immediately, eager to accommodate her preferences and minimize conflict. Tonight, I typed a different response. "I'll be in touch when I'm ready to discuss terms. Currently consulting with legal counsel to understand my options."
Her reply came within minutes. "Marcus, please don't make this more complicated than it needs to be. We can handle this amicably if we're both reasonable." I showed the exchange to Derek, who read both messages with professional detachment. She wants amicable on her terms, which means quick resolution that doesn't threaten her plans with the new boyfriend. And what should I want? You should want fair. Amicable is a bonus, but fair is non-negotiable. I turned off my phone without responding to Victoria's second message, feeling something I hadn't experienced in months of marriage counseling disguised as career pressure. For the first time since Victoria had announced her dissatisfaction with my professional trajectory, I was acting according to my own judgment rather than reacting to her expectations. The sensation felt unfamiliar but liberating, like discovering muscles I'd forgotten I possessed. Tomorrow would bring more legal preparation, more financial analysis, and more strategic planning for a divorce I'd never wanted, but would handle on my own terms. Victoria had spent months orchestrating my disposal while pretending to encourage my improvement. Now she would discover that the passive, unambitious husband she'd been so eager to replace possessed capabilities she'd never bothered to recognize. Some lessons in underestimation I was beginning to understand came with consequences the teacher never anticipated. 6 weeks into my strategic divorce preparation, Victoria was growing increasingly frustrated with my refusal to accommodate her timeline. She'd called 17 times in the past week, left voicemails that progressed from politely urgent to barely controlled irritation, and finally resorted to showing up at Morrison Tech demanding to speak with me. Security had called my desk to report that my wife was in the lobby, insisting she needed to discuss urgent family matters. I told them to inform her that all communication should go through our respective attorneys, then watched from my office window as she stormed across the parking lot toward her car. Even from 4 floors up, her anger was visible in every gesture. Patricia Wells had spent those 6 weeks conducting what she called due diligence with extreme prejudice. Her investigation into Victoria's affair with David Brennan had uncovered details that transformed my understanding of both the timeline and scope of their relationship. Victoria hadn't just been unfaithful for 3 months, she'd been planning her exit strategy for over a year, while systematically undermining my confidence and self-worth. "Your wife is a piece of work," Patricia said during our weekly strategy meeting, spreading photographs across her conference table. These were taken 14 months ago at the Riverside Country Club annual gala. The images showed Victoria dancing with David Brennan, laughing at something he'd whispered in her ear, her hand resting on his chest in a gesture that spoke of intimacy rather than casual acquaintance. The date stamp confirmed what I'd suspected but hadn't wanted to acknowledge. Victoria's dissatisfaction with our marriage hadn't been a recent development triggered by my career stagnation. "She met him more than a year ago," I said, studying the photos with the detached analysis I'd learned to apply to emotional devastation, "and began cultivating the relationship immediately.
My investigator found credit card records showing frequent lunches at upscale restaurants, shopping trips that coincided with his business schedule, and hotel charges that aligned perfectly with his travel calendar. Patricia produced another stack of documents, bank statements showing withdrawals and expenditures I'd never questioned because I'd trusted my wife's financial management. Victoria had been funding her affair with money from our joint accounts, essentially making me an unwitting investor in my own betrayal. The hotel charges span 8 months, Marcus. This wasn't a sudden romance that developed from innocent friendship. This was a calculated courtship conducted while she was simultaneously undermining your marriage from within. I absorbed this information with the same systematic approach I used for complex technical problems, compartmentalizing the emotional impact to focus on strategic implications. Victoria had been conducting psychological warfare against our relationship while building her replacement life with methodical precision. What about the house valuation? Patricia smiled with the satisfaction of someone who'd uncovered significant financial deception. Victoria's appraisal was $60,000 below current market value. She obtained it from a friend of David Brennan's who specializes in undervaluing properties for investors looking to acquire below-market real estate. So their offer to buy the house was designed to cheat me out of equity while giving them a discount. Exactly. They weren't offering fair market value. They were offering insider pricing based on a deliberately low appraisal. The mathematical elegance of Victoria's deception was almost admirable. She'd been systematically devaluing our assets while positioning herself to acquire them at a discount through her lover's professional connections. Every aspect of our divorce had been planned to maximize her advantage while minimizing my compensation for 12 years of marriage. Patricia, I want to file countersuit. She looked up from the financial documents with genuine interest. On what grounds? Fraud, breach of fiduciary duty, intentional infliction of affection, and alienation of affection. Victoria has been conducting systematic financial deception while pursuing adultery and psychological manipulation. I want her to understand that actions have consequences. Patricia leaned back in her chair, studying my face with professional assessment. That's a significant escalation from defensive strategy to offensive warfare. Are you prepared for the kind of legal battle that involves? I'm prepared for whatever it takes to ensure Victoria doesn't profit from betraying our marriage while simultaneously defrauding me financially. Good, because what I'm about to show you will give us everything we need to make her extremely uncomfortable in court. Patricia opened a final folder containing phone records, email transcripts, and financial documents that painted a picture of conspiracy between Victoria and David Brennan that went far beyond simple adultery. They'd been planning not just her divorce, but the acquisition of our marital assets at below-market prices through coordinated deception. They've been using David's real estate expertise to identify and undervalue every significant asset in your marriage. The house, your retirement accounts, even your car was appraised by one of his associates. This isn't just adultery, Marcus. This is organized fraud. I spent the next hour reviewing evidence that transformed my wife from unfaithful spouse to criminal conspirator. Email exchanges discussed strategies for making me appear financially irresponsible. Text messages coordinated meetings to plan asset acquisition. Financial records showed money transfers that funded both their relationship and their legal strategy. How soon can we file the countersuit? I can have papers ready by Friday. But Marcus, once we file these charges, there's no going back to amicable divorce. Victoria will understand that you've discovered the full scope of her deception, and she'll fight back with everything she has. Let her fight. She's been fighting dirty for over a year, while I played by rules she already abandoned. It's time she understands that her passive, unambitious husband is capable of strategic thinking when properly motivated. Patricia grinned with the predatory satisfaction of an attorney who'd built a devastating case. Friday it is. Thursday evening brought the call I'd been expecting since Patricia had begun her investigation. Victoria's attorney, Robert Hartwell, requested an emergency meeting to discuss what he termed recent developments that might affect settlement negotiations. "Mr. Hendricks," I said when I arrived at his office with Patricia, "I think there may be some misunderstandings about my client's intentions regarding your divorce proceedings." Patricia opened her briefcase and began arranging documents on the conference table with theatrical precision.
Mr. Hartwell, the only misunderstanding has been your client's assumption that her fraud would remain undiscovered. Hartwell's composure cracked slightly as he recognized the photographs, financial records, and communication transcripts that documented Victoria's conspiracy with David Brennan. His practiced poker face couldn't quite conceal his recognition that his client had been far less careful about covering her tracks than she'd believed. These documents prove conspiracy to commit fraud, adultery conducted with marital funds, and systematic deception designed to defraud my client of his legitimate share of marital assets. Your client has been conducting organized theft disguised as marriage counseling. Victoria sat beside her attorney, wearing the black suit that had always made her look formidable in business contexts. Today, it made her look like someone preparing for battle she hadn't expected to fight. Her confident composure had been replaced by careful calculation, probably trying to determine how much we actually knew. "Marcus," she said, speaking directly to me for the first time in weeks, "I think we can resolve this without unnecessary complications." "The complications became necessary when you decided to defraud me while conducting psychological warfare against our marriage," I replied, noting how strange it felt to speak to her with complete emotional detachment. Patricia placed the hotel receipts in front of Hartwell with deliberate ceremony. "Your client used marital funds to finance her affair for 8 months, while simultaneously undermining her husband's confidence and self-worth through systematic emotional manipulation."
Furthermore, I added, pulling out the real estate documents Patricia had prepared, she coordinated with her lover to obtain fraudulent property appraisals designed to cheat me out of $60,000 in home equity. Victoria's carefully maintained composure finally cracked. "That's not fraud, Marcus. That's smart business. Obtaining deliberately low appraisals from your boyfriend's associates in order to purchase marital assets at below-market prices is the definition of fraud, Victoria." Hartwell held up his hand to silence his client before she could incriminate herself further. "Perhaps we should discuss settlement terms that address everyone's concerns." Patricia smiled with cold satisfaction. "Mr. Hartwell, we're not here to negotiate. We're here to inform you that countersuit papers will be filed tomorrow morning charging your client with fraud, breach of fiduciary duty, intentional infliction of emotional distress, and conspiracy to commit theft." "Additionally," I said, enjoying the shock that replaced Victoria's calculated confidence, "I'm filing for full recovery of marital funds used to finance the affair, punitive damages for emotional distress, and attorney's fees for the legal costs incurred due to your client's deceptive practices." Victoria stared at me as if seeing someone she'd never met before. "Marcus, this isn't like you. You don't fight dirty." "I don't fight dirty against people who fight fair," I corrected. "But you abandoned fairness over a year ago when you began planning my disposal while pretending to work on our marriage." Patricia gathered her documents with professional efficiency. "Gentlemen, Miss Pemberton, we'll see you in court. Discovery should be particularly interesting given the volume of evidence we've accumulated." We left Hartwell's office with Victoria's shocked expression burned into my memory. For 12 years, she'd been married to a man who avoided conflict, sought compromise, and prioritized harmony over personal advantage. She'd never considered that those same analytical skills that made me an effective systems analyst could be applied to legal strategy when properly motivated. The next morning brought Patricia's countersuit filing and Victoria's immediate attempt at damage control. She called 6 times before 9 a.m., left voicemails that progressed from conciliatory to desperate, and finally sent a text that revealed how completely her strategic position had collapsed. "Marcus, please call me. I think we've both said things we don't mean. Let's try to work this out privately." I showed the message to Derek over coffee, noting how Victoria's tone had shifted from commanding to pleading once she realized the passive husband she'd planned to discard possessed capabilities she'd never bothered to discover. "She's scared," Derek observed. "Probably just realized that her smart business practices look a lot like criminal conspiracy when documented properly." Patricia thinks Victoria will try to settle quickly once she understands the full scope of the evidence we've compiled. "And what do you want?" I want her to understand that dismissing someone as pathetic and unambitious doesn't mean they lack the intelligence to recognize betrayal or the capability to respond strategically when necessary. Derek grinned. In other words, you want to teach her the same lesson she's been trying to teach you about consequences. Exactly. Victoria's attorney called Patricia that afternoon requesting immediate settlement negotiations. The confidence that had characterized their initial divorce strategy had evaporated once they realized the depth of evidence documenting Victoria's systematic deception and financial fraud. They want to offer you 70% of marital assets plus full recovery of funds used for the affair, Patricia reported during our emergency consultation. No spousal support, but substantial punitive compensation for emotional distress. And the house? Full market value appraisal plus compensation for the attempted fraud. Victoria would need to buy you out at fair market price or sell to a third party. The terms represented complete capitulation from Victoria's original demand for quick, amicable divorce on her terms. Instead of upgrading to a better husband while keeping the marital assets she'd grown accustomed to, she was facing significant financial penalties for her deceptive practices. What's the timeline? They want resolution within 2 weeks. Victoria apparently needs to finalize everything before David Brennan begins questioning his investment in a woman who comes with this much legal baggage. I considered Patricia's summary, recognizing the elegant justice of Victoria's situation. She'd spent over a year planning to replace me with someone who offered better financial prospects and social status. Now she faced the possibility that her upgraded husband might reconsider his upgrade if it came with financial obligations and legal complications. I want to add one more condition, I said, surprising Patricia with my additional demand. What condition? Victoria has to personally deliver the settlement documents to me at Morrison Tech. I want her to come to my workplace, in front of my colleagues, and formally acknowledge that her pathetic, unambitious husband turned out to be more strategically capable than she'd calculated. Patricia laughed with genuine appreciation. That's not legally necessary, but it's psychologically devastating. I like it. 2 weeks later, Victoria arrived at Morrison Tech carrying a briefcase containing settlement documents that awarded me everything Patricia had negotiated, plus additional concessions her attorney had agreed to in order to avoid trial. She wore the same black suit from our confrontation with Hartwell, but her earlier confidence had been replaced by careful humility. Derek had arranged for several colleagues to be working late that evening, ensuring Victoria's visit would be witnessed by the professional community where I'd built my reputation through steady competence rather than dramatic gestures. She walked through our office space like someone visiting a foreign country, probably noticing for the first time the respect my colleagues showed me and the evidence of professional achievement she'd been too focused on criticism to recognize. "Marcus," she said when she reached my desk, setting down the briefcase with ceremony that felt like surrender, "I brought the papers you requested." I gestured to the chair across from my desk, noting how uncomfortable she looked in an environment where I was valued and respected rather than criticized and dismissed. "Please, have a seat. I want to review everything carefully before signing." She watched me examine each document with the same systematic attention I brought to technical problems, probably realizing that the analytical skills she'd criticized as unambitious were exactly what had enabled me to uncover and counter her deceptive strategy. "The house proceeds will be transferred within 30 days, and the compensation for other expenses will be handled through escrow." "Other expenses," I repeated, noting her reluctance to explicitly acknowledge the fraud charges that had transformed her strategic divorce into financial disaster. "You mean the marital funds you used to finance your affair with David Brennan?" Victoria flinched at the direct language. "Yes. And the deliberately fraudulent property appraisals you coordinated to cheat me out of home equity?" "Yes." Derek approached my desk carrying coffee, his presence a reminder that Victoria's acknowledgement of her deception was being witnessed by colleagues who'd supported me through the divorce process. "Everything look acceptable?" Derek asked, reviewing the settlement documents with professional interest. "Very acceptable," I confirmed, signing the final page with the same careful script I'd used to grade papers for years. "Victoria has been quite generous in acknowledging her mistakes." She sat in silence while I completed the paperwork, probably processing the complete reversal of power dynamics that had led to this moment. 6 months ago, she'd been planning my disposal while criticizing my lack of ambition. Today, she was delivering financial compensation for fraud while acknowledging that her pathetic husband had outmaneuvered her completely. "Marcus," she said after I'd finished signing, "I need you to know that none of this was personal. I genuinely believed you could become someone more."
Ambitious. Victoria, it was entirely personal. You spent over a year systematically undermining my confidence while planning to replace me with someone who better matched your financial and social aspirations. The fact that you convinced yourself it was for my own good doesn't change the fundamental cruelty of your approach. She looked around my office, taking in the awards and recognition that evidenced the professional respect she'd convinced me I lacked. I underestimated you. Yes, you did. You confused kindness with weakness, compromise with incompetence, and stability with stagnation. Those were expensive mistakes. Victoria gathered her purse, preparing to leave the workplace where her former husband had demonstrated capabilities she'd never bothered to recognize. What happens now? Now you live with the consequences of treating your marriage like a business transaction where you could upgrade husbands without cost or complication. She walked toward the elevator, probably heading home to explain to David Brennan why their real estate investment had become significantly more expensive than originally planned. Derek waited until the elevator doors closed before sitting down across from my desk. "How does it feel?" "Like justice," I said, looking at the settlement documents that awarded me financial compensation for 12 years of marriage that had ended in systematic betrayal. For the first time since this started, I feel like the outcome matches the behavior. And what's next for Marcus Hendricks? I considered his question while organizing the legal documents that represented my freedom from a marriage that had become a continuous evaluation I was destined to fail. Next, I focus on building a life with someone who appreciates steady progress instead of demanding dramatic transformation. Any candidates in mind? Not yet, but I've learned the importance of compatibility in fundamental values rather than just physical attraction and social positioning. Derek nodded. "Sounds like Victoria taught you some valuable lessons after all." "She taught me the difference between a partner who supports your growth and one who demands your transformation into someone else entirely." 6 months later, I was settled in my new downtown condominium, had accepted the director position at Morrison Tech, and was dating Sarah Martinez, a fellow systems analyst who appreciated competence over charisma and valued stability over excitement. Sarah laughed at my jokes, respected my work, and never suggested I needed to become someone different to deserve her affection. Victoria had married David Brennan in a ceremony that, according to mutual friends, cost more than most people's annual salaries. They'd purchased a mansion in the exclusive Hillcrest neighborhood, financed through commercial real estate ventures that required constant attention and risk management. Cassandra mentioned during a chance encounter at the grocery store that Victoria seemed stressed about David's demanding travel schedule and the financial pressures of maintaining their lifestyle. Apparently, upgrading to a more ambitious husband came with complications Victoria hadn't anticipated when she was criticizing my preference for sustainable success over dramatic advancement. "She asks about you sometimes," Cassandra said, probably hoping for gossip she could share at their next book club meeting. "I hope she's happy," I replied, meaning it despite everything that had happened between us. "Are you happy, Marcus?" I considered the question while loading groceries into the car I'd purchased with money from our divorce settlement. My life was quieter now, less focused on impressing others and more concentrated on personal satisfaction and professional excellence. Sarah and I were planning a vacation to Ireland, something I'd always wanted to do but had never mentioned to Victoria because I knew she'd prefer more fashionable destinations. "I'm content," I told Cassandra, "and I've learned that contentment is something to be grateful for rather than ashamed of." That evening, Sarah and I cooked dinner together in my kitchen, discussing plans for our trip and sharing stories from our respective workdays. She listened with genuine interest when I explained the technical challenges I'd solved, offered insights from her own projects, and never suggested that my satisfaction with professional competence represented a character flaw requiring correction. "Marcus," she said as we cleaned up after dinner, "I have something to tell you." My stomach clenched momentarily, memories of Victoria's devastating revelations still fresh enough to trigger anxiety when conversations took unexpected turns. "What is it?" Sarah smiled, reaching into her purse to pull out an envelope marked with her company letterhead. "I got the promotion to senior systems architect. They want me to lead the new development team." I felt genuine joy for her success, uncomplicated by resentment or competitive comparison. "Sarah, that's fantastic. You've been working toward this for 2 years. I couldn't have done it without your encouragement. You never made me feel like my ambition was threatening or that my success diminished your worth." Her comment highlighted the fundamental difference between my relationship with Sarah and my marriage to Victoria. Sarah's achievements enhanced my pride in her rather than triggering insecurity about my own adequacy. Her success felt like shared celebration rather than competitive evaluation. "I'm proud of you," I said, meaning it completely, "and excited to see what you accomplish in the new role." "There's something else," she said, her expression shifting to something that might have been nervousness. "The position comes with relocation to the Seattle office. It's a significant opportunity, but it would mean leaving Phoenix." I processed this information, recognizing that Sarah was giving me the choice Victoria had never offered, the opportunity to support her ambitions even when they complicated my own plans. "When would you need to relocate?" 3 months. "But Marcus, I want you to know that I wouldn't take the position if it meant losing what we have together." The offer represented exactly the kind of partnership I'd thought I'd had with Victoria, but had actually been missing throughout our marriage. Sarah was including me in her decision-making process, rather than presenting me with conclusions she'd reached independently. "Have you considered whether Morrison Tech might have opportunities for someone with my experience in Seattle?" Sarah's face brightened with relief and excitement. "Actually, I've already researched that. They have an opening for a director-level position in systems analysis. I didn't want to mention it unless you were interested in considering relocation." I pulled her into my arms, marveling at the sensation of being with someone who planned for our future together rather than planning around my presumed limitations. "Sarah, I can't think of anything I'd rather do than support your career advancement while building something meaningful together." "Are you sure? It's a big change, and I know you value stability." "I've learned there's a difference between stability and stagnation. Moving to Seattle with you represents the kind of growth that actually matters. Building a life with someone who appreciates who I am while encouraging me to become who I want to be." We spent the evening researching Seattle neighborhoods, discussing the logistics of relocation, and planning the transition to a new city where we could build a relationship based on mutual respect and shared goals, rather than continuous evaluation and demanded transformation. As I fell asleep that night, I reflected on the lessons Victoria had inadvertently taught me about the difference between partnership and exploitation. Her demand that I become someone else had ultimately freed me to find someone who valued who I actually was. 6 months later, Sarah and I were settled in a Seattle apartment with views of Puget Sound, both thriving in our new positions and building the kind of relationship I'd thought existed in my marriage to Victoria. We supported each other's ambitions without demanding personality changes, celebrated each other's successes without competitive resentment, and approached challenges as partners rather than adversaries. I received a wedding invitation from Victoria and David Brennan 6 months after our move to Seattle. The elaborate card announced their reception at the Riverside Country Club, the same venue where they'd begun their affair while she was still married to me. I considered attending, just to demonstrate that I bore no lingering resentment, but ultimately decided that some chapters of life are better closed completely. Instead, Sarah and I spent that Saturday hiking through the Olympic Mountains, enjoying the kind of simple adventure that brought us both satisfaction without requiring expensive props or social positioning. The contrast between what Victoria needed for happiness and what actually made me happy had never been clearer. "Any regrets?" Sarah asked as we rested at a scenic overlook, the Seattle skyline visible in the distance. "About Victoria? About any of it. The divorce, the legal battle, starting over in a new city." I considered her question while watching clouds drift across the mountains that had become our new playground. "I regret that Victoria and I were incompatible in ways neither of us recognized early enough to avoid hurt. But I don't regret learning who I am when I stopped trying to be someone else." "And who are you when you're not trying to be someone else?"
I'm someone who values depth over flash, partnership over performance, and authentic connection over social positioning. I'm someone who builds things that last, rather than chasing things that impress." Sarah smiled. "I like that person, even though he's not particularly ambitious by some people's standards, especially because he knows the difference between ambition and wisdom." That evening, we received a text from Derek, who'd remained in Phoenix but stayed connected through regular communication. "Saw Victoria at the grocery store today, asked how you were doing, seemed genuinely curious about your life in Seattle." I showed the message to Sarah, who read it with the amused detachment of someone secure in her relationship. "Do you think she regrets how everything ended?" "I think she regrets the cost of her choices, but I doubt she regrets the choices themselves. Victoria needed someone who shared her values about success and status. David Brennan probably fits her needs better than I ever did. And you needed someone who shared your values about partnership and authenticity." Exactly. 2 years later, I was promoted to Regional Director for Morris & Tech's Pacific Northwest Division, a position that came with exactly the kind of responsibility and recognition Victoria had insisted I needed to pursue more aggressively. The difference was that I'd achieved advancement through competence and patience rather than aggression and risk-taking, staying true to my natural approach while growing into expanded leadership. Sarah and I were planning our wedding, a modest ceremony focused on celebrating our partnership rather than impressing others with expensive displays. We'd found a venue overlooking Puget Sound, invited 50 close friends and family members, and designed a celebration that reflected our shared values rather than social expectations. "Marcus," Sarah said one evening as we reviewed wedding plans, "I have something to tell you." The phrase no longer triggered anxiety thanks to 2 years of honest communication and mutual respect. "What's on your mind?" "I've been thinking about what you said when we first met, about being content with who you are rather than constantly striving to become someone else. And I realized that's what attracted me to you. You're the first man I've dated who didn't try to change me or make me feel like I needed to be different to deserve love." Her observation highlighted the fundamental lesson Victoria had taught me through negative example. Authentic partnership requires accepting and appreciating who your partner actually is rather than demanding they transform into who you wish they were. "Sarah, you're the first woman I've been with who made me feel like who I am is enough." Because it is enough. You're kind, intelligent, loyal, and capable. Those are qualities to celebrate, not criticize. We were married on a sunny Saturday in September, surrounded by people who appreciated our relationship for what it actually was rather than what it might become. Derek served as my best man, flying in from Phoenix with stories about Morris & Tech's continued growth and speculation about Victoria's marriage to David Brennan. "She looks happy," he reported during the rehearsal dinner, "but it's that carefully maintained happiness that requires constant effort to sustain." "Some people thrive on that kind of intensity," I replied, toasting Sarah's promotion to senior architect with champagne that cost less than Victoria's typical bottle of wine. "And some people thrive on the kind of steady satisfaction you've built with Sarah." Different approaches to happiness for different personalities. Derek raised his glass to finding the right approach for who you actually are instead of who someone else thinks you should be. The toast captured exactly what I'd learned through the painful process of discovering that my 12-year marriage had been built on fundamental incompatibility disguised as love. Victoria had needed someone who shared her hunger for constant advancement and social positioning. I had needed someone who shared my appreciation for sustainable progress and authentic connection. Neither approach was wrong, but they were completely incompatible within a partnership that required shared values and mutual respect. 5 years after my divorce from Victoria, I received a Facebook message that brought our story full circle. She'd seen news of my promotion to regional director and wanted to congratulate me on achieving the kind of advancement she'd always believed I was capable of pursuing. "Marcus, I saw the announcement about your new position. I'm genuinely happy to see you found success on your own terms. I hope you know that my criticism came from believing in your potential, not from lack of respect for who you were." I showed the message to Sarah, who read it with the secure confidence of someone who'd never doubted my worth or capabilities. "Are you going to respond?" "I think so. Victoria was wrong about how to encourage growth, but she wasn't wrong about my having untapped potential. I wrote a brief response thanking her for the kind words and wishing her happiness in her marriage to David. The exchange felt like the mature resolution our relationship had never achieved when we were married, acknowledgement that we both grown into better versions of ourselves by finding partners who appreciated our actual personalities rather than demanding transformation into different people. "Any regrets about how everything ended?" Sarah asked, probably curious about whether I carried residual feelings for the woman who'd shared 12 years of my life. "I regret the pain we caused each other by trying to make an incompatible relationship work through force of will rather than recognizing we needed different kinds of partners." "But you don't regret the divorce itself?" "The divorce freed both of us to find relationships that actually fit our personalities and values. Victoria needed someone who shared her appetite for risk and status. I needed someone who shared my appreciation for depth and partnership." Sarah smiled. "And we both got exactly what we needed." That evening, we sat on our balcony overlooking Puget Sound, planning a vacation to Ireland that had been postponed for 2 years due to work commitments but was finally becoming reality. Sarah's success as senior architect had exceeded even her ambitious expectations, while my regional director role provided exactly the kind of leadership challenge I'd discovered I genuinely enjoyed. "Marcus," Sarah said as we watched ferries cross the Sound in the fading light, "do you ever wonder what would have happened if Victoria had approached your marriage differently?" "You mean if she'd tried to support my growth instead of demanding my transformation?" "Exactly." I considered the hypothetical while sipping wine and enjoying the peaceful satisfaction that had become the foundation of my daily experience. I think we might have built something sustainable if we'd focused on compatibility instead of correction. But ultimately, we wanted different kinds of lives, with different definitions of success. And now you have the kind of life you actually wanted, rather than the kind of life someone else thought you should want. Which is probably the most important lesson Victoria taught me, even though she never intended to teach it. Sarah reached for my hand, intertwining our fingers with the comfortable familiarity of two people who'd built genuine partnership through mutual respect and shared values. What lesson was that? That being called pathetic by someone who doesn't understand your worth is just another way of discovering who's really worthy of your love. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.